Hey, what can I get for you? Hi, can I get my usual? Your what? You know, my usual. Yeah, what do you mean your usual? Come on, I've been coming here for years. You don't know my usual? No. This is ridiculous. I've been a regular at this diner for the last decade. How the hell can you not know my usual? It's, my first shift. Oh. Well, that sucks. In any case, then, my usual is... Now, hold up. I think I can give you a better offer. Excuse me? You heard me. You said you can give me a better offer, and I'm serious. Alright, then spit it out. Why don't you go and invest in, say, supporting your local small YouTube creator? I'm sorry, what? If you like what you see here on the Skel 23 YouTube channel, you can feel free to go and support me at my Ko-fi page. And for only a few $1 dues, you can support me at buymeacoffee.com/Skel23. Who are you talking to? You, of course. Really, because it looked like you were talking to some kind of studio audience. Am I being filmed right now? Hello? Seems like I'm gonna have to get a new usual haunt. Feels good to be back on my home turf. It's been, God, over a year since my last video on a boomer shooter. And what a perfect title to return to my roots with. For those who haven't seen my previous video on Cultic's first chapter, first off, go watch that. Not to say that it has a super in-depth story that requires a thorough explanation. Really, if you wanted to ignore the entire story, you can pretty much do that, just as God intended. Regardless, to get a brief summary out of the way, in Cultic you play as a 1960s detective, whom for the sake of this video I'll be referring to as Dave for simplicity's sake, who ends up going in over his head while investigating several mysterious disappearances in the city of New Grandul and its surrounding forests. As in typical cop movie fashion, he's kicked off the force, and due to what I can only assume is a result of the same brain deficiency that makes all characters of this type do this, he decides to take matters into his own hands and drive out to an asylum where a few of the loose threads have been previously pointing to. Of course, he's captured by a mysterious death cult, he wakes up on a mountain of corpses, yada yada yada, he just goes and kills a bunch of dudes. And after pretty much annihilating what would be like 95% of the cult's most devout members and slaying an elder god spawned from the cult's own tampering with ancient evils and imbued remains, we can now move on to Chapter 2. Yeah, I probably should have prefaced all of that by saying I was going to spoil the absolute fuck out of Chapter 1. Actually, you know what? You clicked on this video with Chapter 2 in the title, so it's your own damn fault. Regardless, if you want a review or whatever, I'd give the first chapter a rousing recommendation, just as I had in my previous video. For a game that was made almost entirely by one guy, Cultic Chapter 1 is a damn good time. But all of that changes with the release of Chapter 2. You see, not only is the one-man band development team of Jason Smith now a two-piece with Nick Paulsmeyer, the second chapter itself is actually DLC for the first. I've seen a lot of people being kinda butthurt about that, which, while fair, I think is a little silly. At the end of the day, as nice as it would have been to have the game just stay $10 forever, even after the release of Chapter 2, you have to keep in mind that a two-person development team working on the game for nearly full-time for several years, whilst pretty much exclusively subsiding on the sales from Chapter 1, isn't exactly doable. I don't exactly love the decision myself, but I at least understand the thought process. The whole buy what you want thing works better with games that have more DLC. And for a game with 2 chapters, one of which is required for the other to play, it's not as reasonable. Whatever, I hate talking about shit like this. And really the only reason I brought it up is to mention the fact that a pretty sizable chunk of Chapter 2's maps were made by the new guy. And unfortunately, these new maps are one of my biggest critiques with the game as a whole, but we'll get to that later. First, we actually need to start the game, and as is tradition, we're going to be playing on very hard difficulty, and going for as many secrets as we can. Well, in the case of this playthrough, I actually managed to find all of them. And for reasons we're going to get to, finding as many as you can is essential to your survival. Unlike Chapter 1, there's no flashy intro cinematic. The game just plops you down in the basement of the New Grandul police station. The place is a ghost town and has been pretty much obliterated by some serious conflict. Oh, yeah, that's right, I should probably talk about Interlude, seeing how it wraps up some of the loose ends between Chapter 1 and 2. Interlude is more or less a little chapter designed to effectively bridge the gap between Chapters 1 and 2, and it's fine. Frankly, I don't care for it, but it's like 30 minutes long and free, so I don't mind. This chapter starts off by showing Dave going through the evil hell portal that was spawned from the demon at the end of the last episode, only for the head honcho cultist to just, I don't know, turn it off, because he has that power for some reason. So Dave gets spit out and falls to his death. No, literally, he fucking dies. Obviously, we know that he does come back, but for an entire 2 months he sits in the morgue, in the basement of the New Grandual Police Department. We're put in the shoes of a beat cop who's stuck working file duty, only for things to go very quickly awry. In terms of gameplay, our arsenal in this chapter is pretty tight. The only returning weapons are the dynamite bundle and Molotovs. Everything else is new. I'll go more into the new weapons in a second as they also appear in Chapter 2, but for right now, just know that they range from a kinda decent side grade to being absolutely fantastic. The only new enemy to get introduced is the turned cop, and they are some of just the most bullshit things in this game. They're a typical squishy human enemy, but instead of carrying a regular weapon like a pistol or a shotgun or a machine gun, they have a fucking revolver that can take away 40% of your health in a single hit. But even worse is the fact that they're kinda tactical. You see, with every other ranged enemy, you can duck in and out of cover to avoid gunfire. But the cops don't do that? They just don't. If you seek cover while they're winding up to shoot you, they sit and wait. They wait for you to pop back out of cover, and quite literally within a few frames of leaving cover, they fire. This makes dealing with these guys in large groups, especially in open areas, almost impossible, as if you get pinned down, you practically can't do anything except maybe blind throw dynamite. And the next thing to do if that doesn't work is, I don't know, just start praying. Disregarding the one genuinely quite terrible new enemy, everything else is pretty decent. There's even a fun boss at the end, which is actually kind of challenging, since your selection of weapons is pretty light. But besides that, maybe some mildly interesting lore bits you can scrounge up, this chapter is a stopgap between us and the rest of the game. Anyways, our first real level is set in the city of New Grandual, and it's a solid introduction of the new mechanics in Chapter 2. First and foremost, all of the weapons from Interlude will make an appearance in some form this time around. Starting off with the revolver. Despite being a decent weapon in its own right, it more or less sits in the shadow of the Mare's Leg from Chapter 1. Since they both use the same ammo type and have similar uses, it's kind of hard to see a reason to use this thing past the first few levels. We can attain a decently sized arsenal in this first map. The hatchet, pistol, shotgun, dynamite molotovs, the basic stuff. As was the case in Chapter 1, throwables are probably the biggest boon in your arsenal for taking out medium to large groups of enemies. However, in this episode, fire is a much more powerful resource, and that's for reasons we're going to be getting to shortly. Not to demean the usefulness of dynamite bundles, as they're still incredibly versatile, although the cluster toss is still kinda shit. We won't be having much to work with in this level anyways, as is the nature of games like this. Thankfully, most of the enemies we'll be up against are now common fodder. The typical hatchet, handgun, shotgun cultists, with a few turn cops from Interlude thrown in for good measure. And just like in Interlude, they can be an absolute fucking nightmare to deal with. Thankfully, Chapter 2 introduces a new mechanic in the form of tower shields. The shield cultists from Chapter 1 have had a minor rework, in the sense that when they die, they drop their shield for the player to use. And these things, despite being made predominantly of wood, can be pretty damn useful, allowing you to soak up some pretty good damage. Unfortunately, they will eventually break, and even worse, they can only be used with one-handed weapons, which the base shotgun is sadly not one of. But the developers decided to smile down upon you and grant you easily one of the best weapons in the game pretty early into this level. The SASG, which I can only assume stands for Semi-Automatic Shotgun, and it is an absolute beast, ported in directly from Interlude. And despite the fact that in its base form it is less powerful than the standard sawed-off, it is still a force to be reckoned with. And besides, the double-aught buckshot upgrade for this thing makes the damage more aligned with the sawed-off anyways. Combine that with the extended magazine, barrel choke, and a tower shield in your other hand, and you have a pretty formidable combo that's gonna make you almost invincible early game. And you are gonna fucking need it, because afterwards the game introduces one of its most dangerous new enemies. The riot cops are a serious force to be reckoned with, especially this early into the game, when your weapons are, still pretty garbage. They've got a ton of health, can throw gas grenades, and carry an SASG, which they can fire concerningly fast. But they, and this is a pro tip that can be applied to most high-value targets, are pretty scared of fire. I mean, no duh, nearly every enemy in this game is. But the rest can be pretty easily dispatched with small arms fire. The riot cops, and later on when the game reintroduces butchers and armored cultists, are not so easy. But fire cleanses all, and having a decent stockpile of Molotovs early on is an easy way to keep a fire starter close at hand. On the whole though, enemies like riot cops appear way more often than they did in Chapter 1. This chapter is substantially more difficult, enough so for it to be a pretty big turnoff for casual players, I assume. Granted, I am playing on very hard, and since chapter 1 was pretty much smooth sailing after level 3, the added difficulty is something I welcome. But later on, things can start to get just a little teeny bit bullshit, especially when it comes to the placement of larger enemies. Hell, in this level alone, the first level in the game, we fight 3 or 4 riot cops and a butcher, alongside a whole feast of other regular enemies. And speaking of butchers, the butcher we fight is in a genuinely quite good horror section. Chapter 2, like how it does with many aspects of Chapter 1, amplifies the horror undertones pretty heavily, although they are usually confined to their own sections. Take, for instance, the apartment block here in level 1. It slows the game's pace down to a crawl, and makes you take it nice and slow, before dropping the hammer on you about halfway through. The mace zombies are easily one of the highlights of the new enemy roster. While only being used in very specific spooky sections of the game, they are a pretty damn effective way of scaring the pants off the player. Compared to the slower, bumbling zombies of the previous chapter, these guys are a force to be reckoned with. They move fast, can hit pretty hard, and usually come in groups. Thankfully, even this early into the game, they can be dispatched with a well-placed shotgun shell. But this part is a fucking butt clencher, but like in a good way, you know? Combine these guys with the butcher you fight at the tail end of this section, and you have a recipe for what is easily the most memorable part of this level, besides maybe the sewer section, which is coincidentally also one to use mace zombies. Although that section does expose the less enjoyable side of this enemy. In small to medium-sized groups, they can be an effective way of keeping a player on their toes, but when thrown at us en masse like this, they can be a bit of a pain. Dealing with them effectively like this is hard because you can't outrun them unless you use more advanced movement tech, which I'll be covering shortly because it's another part of this game that's been changed, and since they can actually close the gap, dealing with them with explosives is kind of a crapshoot. This will, again, become more apparent in levels to come. But for right now, we're moving on to the shopping center. And quick side tangent, the level names in this game kinda suck. I mean, they get the job done, but they're just so boring. Not to say the ones in the first chapter were much better, but still. The slaughterhouse, the farm, the fairgrounds, the old familiar, the famous cock, the crossed hands, the good companions. I mean, fuck me, this ain't a pub crawl, man. Give me something to work with. Say what you will about the self-flating nature of sigils sometimes, but fuck me if John Romero can't come up with a good level name. Tangent aside, this level also starts off with some spookiness. Well, after this giant arena section in the underground parking lot, which gives me a good opportunity to talk about this game's movement mechanics. You see, the infinite sliding from Chapter 1 has been patched out. You can only slide 3 times now, before needing to let your stamina meter recharge. The developers tried to compromise by giving you a dodge ability, which is really only useful in a very select number of circumstances, namely with enemies like the Butcher, who now have the ability to pull you in with a meat hook scorpion style. It's not the most well-telegraphed thing in the world, but if you're paying attention, you can avoid most damage by aptly using the dodge. And you're gonna need every advantage you can get, because the developers start throwing pairs of butchers at you by like the 5th level. Anyways, after the fight in the parking garage, the level does actually get spooky. The department store is another standout section in really the entirety of the chapter. Is that because it has haunted mannequins? Well, yeah, mostly, but it also does something really cool too. Man, what a fucking cool way to reintroduce an old enemy. Once we're done having an episode, and things return to normal, we can explore the shopping center, and it's a pretty good time. Like all video game malls, there are plenty of cheeky references to other games and fun store names to ogle at. But more importantly, above all of that, we can get our hands on my beloved, the mare's leg. So say goodbye to the revolver for the rest of the game. You can make pretty damn good use out of it on this level, as the wide open corridors of the mall's main floors make this thing exceptionally useful. And you bet your ass I dump pretty much all of my weapon parts into this thing going forward. And on the topic of the weapon upgrade system, it's just okay. It's a nice option to have, seeing as the difficulty in this chapter can be pretty cruel later on, but really most of the upgrades are the same across every weapon. Usually some kind of damage boost, a magazine increase, sometimes a rate of fire buff. It's rare that they get some kind of unique bonus. When it comes to changes made in Episode 2, I really don't think there are any. Besides the introduction of the new weapons from Interlude and an upgrade tree for the hatchet, all of the upgrades from Chapter 1 return and have the exact same function. But personally, there are some ones that I definitely slept on my first playthrough. Specifically, the upgraded pistol rounds, which, when combined with the accuracy upgrade, can make the pistol into a mini marksman weapon, capable of 2-shot headshotting pretty much any enemy in the game. Weapon rants aside, this level is pretty much over, and once we clear a path through the west wing of the shopping center, we're allowed to pass on to the third map, the swamp. The swamp doesn't actually start in the swamp, because of course it doesn't. Instead, it starts off with a boss fight against an attack helicopter. Because why wouldn't the cult have access to a military-grade attack chopper? Granted, they have been shown to have access to tanks and military-grade grenade launchers in the past, so I'll let it slide. The fight lasts all of about 2 minutes as the chopper fucks off after we deal enough damage to it. Don't worry though, as we will eventually get to finish it off. Several times, in fact. But now, we can get to the real level. We need to do some cave diving before we can actually get to the swamp part of the level, and it's another genuinely well-executed spooky section. I suppose this also gives me a good opportunity to talk how the health works in this game, because it's kind of different from other shooters. Like most boom shoots, you have your standard health bar and portable medkit, rudimentary stuff, but the field kit will heal over time as you hold the button, instead of healing instantly like it does in most games. And any health pickups that you find which can't go into your health pool will instead be transferred into the field kit. A rather nice bonus seeing as how this episode can be kind of stingy with healing supplies. Secondly, we have imbued remains, which will permanently raise your maximum HP by 5. All up, I think there's 11 different opportunities to pick these up in the chapter, allowing you to get to a maximum of 155 health when fully healed. One thing I did notice is that the developers seem to put more effort into where they're placed in the map. In Chapter 1, you'd find them just kind of lumped in with other random secrets across the map. But here they're placed with more thought. They were always a big part of the lore behind this game, and I suppose now the devs finally wanted to emphasize that a little bit. I bring all this up because you can find some imbued remains in this level in a non-secret area. If you aren't an avid secret hunter, I'm pretty sure this is the first one you're going to find. And again, any advantage you can get is going to be well worth it. Case in point, the swamp. Because this is a video game that came out after the first Dark Souls, the swamp is actually a poison swamp. That's no fun, because there are, you guessed it, fucking swamp zombies, who will become a reoccurring problem throughout the entire game. They appear in swarms and have an unjustifiably high amount of health. Because they're a melee-based enemy who is slower than the player, I've often found myself axing large groups of them to save ammo, and also out of spite. They're a big problem in this level specifically because of how cramped the shantytowns are. They practically make this level into a game of the floor as zombie, as you try to parkour across rooftops to avoid dealing with them. All of this done while dodging cultist gunfire. Credit where credit is due, they are used pretty effectively in this level. Unfortunately, that does not extend to the later maps. The main goal of this level is to find 4 demolition charges, which we can use to blow up this dam that leads to the slaughterhouse. The slaughterhouse being there does partially explain why the water here is so fucked up. Dumping dead meat and blood into the surrounding bodies of water is no good, but that's only half the story. As expected, the slaughterhouse is owned and operated by a cult puppet, and they may have done some tampering with the meat, frankly knowing that it's a safe bet to assume that some of this stuff is actually human meat, but moving on. Since I haven't yet brought them up before now, I should probably talk about the martyrs, one of the few new cultist enemies in the game. They're your standard suicide bomber enemy, although the game, in my opinion anyways, kind of fucks up how they're implemented. In most games, these guys would go down in a few shots and immediately explode to let the player know that they took care of a threat and can move on. But the martyrs here have too much health for their own good, and instead of detonating upon death, the dynamite bundles will actually run the fuse out. And this makes dealing with them a fucking pain, since you can't just take care of them in a quick and orderly fashion. Although this does at the very least mean that they're going to detonate if provoked, if you give them time anyways, so I suppose it's still a silver lining. On the topic of the actual level itself though, the slaughterhouse is actually pretty solid, easily one of my favorites in the episode. Not too big, not too cramped, the enemy placement isn't too bad, and they give you plenty of supplies to deal with the larger threats, including the returning FG-42 sniper rifle and grenade launcher. But besides rounding out our arsenal, this level really doesn't have much story development to go through, so we can move on to the next map, the farm. And unfortunately, this is one of the weaker maps of the chapter. Really, it's a size problem. The map is just too goddamn big for its own good. And sure, previous levels could be large, hell even some of the ones in Chapter 1 were pretty big, but they were always constrained in some way. The city blocks of New Grandul, the thick tree line of the swamp, and maps like the shopping district and slaughterhouse didn't even have any extremely large areas. But this level has just too much dead space. The points of interest themselves are, well, interesting, and they link up to each other in pretty clever ways. But the problem is the map is just empty. Personally, I think this level could stand to be maybe 20% smaller than it currently is. Secondly, in terms of objective, this level is more or less a copy of the swamp. We need 4 demolition charges to destroy this wall leading to the next level. The set piece was fine once, but come on, man. Twice within the span of 2 levels? Just like, what are we doing here, man? Come on. It's not all bad news, though. The state-mandated spooky section set in the farmhouse is pretty well done. It even has some kind of interesting lore implications, and a few fun callbacks to Chapter 1 on top of that. The fight in the basement is kinda ass, seeing as it's a butcher and some cops, which is never a fun combo, but besides that, good section. But once we have all of the demolition charges and we've cleared the way to the top of the mountain, the level is over, and we can progress to one of the highlights of the episode. The Old Town, in the same vein as the church from Chapter 1, is an all-out murder fest. The game throws waves of just about every enemy in the game at us, in what is a genuinely well-designed arena. They give you plenty of cover to work with, and enough ammo and healing supplies to keep you going. As you can imagine, this section makes a killer survival map. But once the last of the cultists fall, our helicopter friend returns, and we can resume where we left off. And the fight is pretty easy. With the ample cover you're given and the heavy weapons dotted around the arena, you can clear through his health bar in like 5 minutes. The game does try to spice things up by spawning waves of cultists in between the ebbs and flows of the fight, but you never have to worry about cultists while actually fighting the chopper, which is nice. Either way, the chopper falls pretty quickly and we can leave the town mostly unscathed. Oh boy, here we go. The fairgrounds. If you thought the previous levels could be big, this one puts every other level in the game to shame. It is huge, encompassing, as the title suggests, an entire medieval fairground and the accompanying castle grounds. I mean, for fuck's sake, it has like 600 enemies in it. This is easily the longest level in the game, at least on a first-time playthrough. And most of that comes down to how the level is designed. Because, well, it's a hexen hub. Damn, 2 videos in a row where I bring up hexen, that's actually kinda crazy. Considering the game genre we're in though, I feel it's more fitting this time. But to sum it up, you have to go and flip 4 switches to turn the park's power on, which will allow us to lower the drawbridge into Castle Grandul. As you can imagine, each switch is tucked away in a reasonably sized dungeon, save for one in the Haunted Castle, which is actually around back. This level reintroduces the Imbued Knights, one of the more dubiously shitty enemies from Chapter 1. Their tankiness combined with their bullshit lunge attack make these guys a recipe for a bad time. But this time, they're accompanied by a crossbow-wielding variant who pelt you with flaming arrows. They are thankfully less hardy than their melee counterparts, but still, not fun. Anyways, this level is pretty solid. Sure, the general wide openness can lead to some pain, specifically Machine Gun Alley here. Fuck Machine Gun Alley. Really, the only section I don't care for is Pirate's Cove. Not only because of this absolute bonkers shooting minigame, but because the game locks you into the brig of a ship with 2 butchers and expects you to just, figure it out. I had to lay down a pretty elaborate TNT trap here to even stand a chance. Still, it's a testament to how good the mechanics are that a section like this isn't impossible. But once the 4 switches have been flipped, the level isn't over. Oh no, we're just getting started. The back half of this level, set in Castle Grandul, is a welcome change of pace. Honestly, one of my favorite sections in the chapter. It's well paced, has some fun secrets, and features a pretty solid arena section near the tail end. But with the castle cleared out, this level is more or less over. Speaking of arenas, the next map takes place in one, and would you believe it, it's boss time again. Specifically the 3rd round of the chopper fight, although this one is thankfully more interesting to say the least. The new attack pattern is a nice change of pace, but he's still a complete pushover. Laying into him with the heavy MGs and bazookas dotted around the map can whittle his health down to about half, and from there it's just a matter of dumping everything you have into him until he dies. Really, it's more a test of the player's movement than it is their skill in combat. Thankfully this time he does actually die, because if I had to kick this thing's ass again, I'd probably just uninstall the game. But with what was ultimately the high point of this chapter now over, things are going to be getting kinda rough. From here on out, our main goal is pretty simple. We need to reach the mountain. I mean, that's been apparent since like level 3, but now we actually have means of doing that. The next level, the train station, is this chapter's gimmick level. It starts off innocently enough. It pits you up against a reasonably entrenched forest inside the train station. Things do get a little cramped in the back area, but it's fine. But really, that's only a taste of what's to come. Because of course, any good game needs to have at least one vehicle level. And this one is not great. And yes, I am going to be unfairly drawing several comparisons between this and the Phantom Express from Blood. But seeing as this game has pretty much made its reputation on being like that game, I suppose it's only fair. Now, the biggest critique I have of this level is actually an inversion of what I've been saying from the previous maps. It's just too goddamn small. What worked so well with the Phantom Express is that the game didn't try to make a realistically modeled train environment. Granted, you could sum that up to the fact that the tech really wasn't there, but I still think the reason lies behind the actual game design itself. To put it simply, Monolith knew what they were doing. I mean, of course they did. I mean, come on, it's Monolith. Saying they were bad at making video games just isn't true. My point is, they probably realized that having to navigate a cramped coach train car with the mechanics of Blood simply wouldn't be fun. And realizing that their tech really wasn't there for it anyways, they took that as an excuse to make an exaggerated caricature of a train. Hence why it's become a textbook example of a vehicle level in a game. But here, the developers went for the realistic approach. The train looks like a real train, and that's the problem. Because in spite of the fact that this entire level isn't like this section just isn't fun to play. It's simply too small for the mechanics to work well. And even when we get on the roof of the train, which is admittedly pretty awesome to look at, and can bounce from car to car, it's still more or less a straight line. The Phantom Express had almost every car feature a second floor, and most areas could be accessible through numerous avenues and secret passageways. But the train here is linear to the nth degree. I mean, it's a set piece, which does make it kind of unfair to judge it against the Phantom Express, which is an entire level, but when half of your level is the set piece, it's kinda hard to not draw comparisons. In my opinion, the breaking point comes when the game spawns 2 butchers in this cramped-ass kitchen and expects you to just, figure it out. In previous levels, when the player had to fight more than one butcher, there was always at least a reasonable amount of space to work with, but this room is a fucking rectangle. I don't care if they give you a free field kit at the end, it's still bullshit. But after a quick pit stop and grabbing a connecting train, we are eventually more permanently stalled at a shipping warehouse. As a swarm of angry cultists unload into the car, all hope might seem lost, But of course, the game isn't done just yet. So the police officer from Interlude plot devices his way back into the story to save our ass. What follows is an entire section set in the shoes of the cop. The game starts us off by giving us this lovely bolt-action rifle, which is the last new weapon of the chapter. Despite being more or less just a fun novelty weapon, seeing as it doesn't have an upgrade tree and only appears sparingly for the rest of the game, it's still pretty damn solid. Frankly, I'm just kind of a sucker for a good video game sniper. On top of that, we're also given the revolver and the SASG, both fully upgraded. And you're gonna need them too, because the game doesn't hold any punches just because we're less strapped than usual. The main goal of this section is to lower the gate on the tracks, allowing the train to continue on. And despite the fact that the developers took this opportunity to make us scrounge around for more keys, this section is actually a nice change of pace, and a breath of fresh air after the cramped disaster of the train. But once the bar has been lifted, the train takes off and we can leave the officer in the dust for good. Strange how the game brings him back for this one section and then proceeds to toss him out for the remainder of the game. I mean, we never even get to learn what happens to him after this, he just kind of disappears. I suppose it's not too important though. At the very least, we can resume our journey as Dave. Well, for a little bit anyways. The Manor is a true change of pace. While the last map dialed everything up to 11, the Manor brings it down to a crawl, but in a good way. This map kicks ass for reasons we'll get to shortly. It's a classic survival horror setup. We've been tortured, captured, and our belongings are obviously gone. Well, they've been locked up anyways. We'll get them back later. Right now, though, we're stuck with whatever we can procure on site, so not a whole lot. And we get the classic survival horror arsenal. Melee weapon, pistol, shotgun, magnum, and thankfully dynamite and molotovs. Our upgrades don't stick around, but it should be fine. This map has the smallest number of enemies in the game, less than 100, which is pretty crazy considering how things have been thus far. And as you can imagine, this map also ramps up the spook sector. It's never really scary, but it has all the tropes. A creepy mannequin room. Yeah, I think I'm just gonna grab this and go. Why do they have to turn around? A hedge maze, complete with inconveniently placed maze zombies. I suppose if any place in the map would have them, putting them here makes most sense. Our main goal of this level is to collect 3 bejeweled skulls for this altered thing in the mansion's foyer. And like any good video game mansion post-Resident Evil, this place has several hidden rooms and mechanisms, besides just having a torture dungeon in the basement. Speaking of the basement, the last skull we need is sitting in the same room as the rest of our gear. Getting in there and getting out in one piece is a surprisingly difficult endeavor, seeing as the game spawns what I'm sure are pretty few butchers on top of a bunch of maze hands down there. Down there, you can also get a skeleton key which unlocks a bunch of doors around the manor, most important of which being a room in the manor's west wing that has the bolt-action rifle in it. This is the only time in the game where the detective can actually get his hands on one. Not that it's going to matter much, as we're going on to the last full level of the game, the bunker. This level sucks. Unfortunately, the game kind of shits the bed here. You see, this map is tiny, like really tiny, but for some reason it feels like they didn't account for that when placing enemies in this level. It is frankly kind of ludicrous how many enemies are crammed into some of these areas. Some are fine, and others are absolute brain torture. In one section we have to fight 2 imbued butchers followed by a horde of swamp zombies just so we can get a quest item. And expect this level of nonsense for the rest of the map. This level is just torture with how much bullshit you get thrown into. You have to drain the corridor from the dangerous poison slop, and doing so requires bumbling your way through 2 halves of the bunker. The cushy devotee quarters and the grubby barracks where everyone else lives. Tackling the devotee quarters first was my prerogative, seeing as how it's easily the harder of the 2 sections. It's cramped and full of high-value targets, and this section in the church is especially bad. 2 cops blindside you off the bat, followed by a bunch of regular cultists, with an additional 2 ghosts and grenade launcher cultists up in the rafters. And if you think that's it, you get a pair of riot cops and flamethrower cultists after that. Oh, and each staircase out of the room has a fucking martyr in it, so good luck with that. This is one room out of like 50 in this level, and a lot of them are like this. The regular barracks aren't any better, stuffed with way too many enemies for their own good. I'm sure the developers literally just stuffed some of them into lockers, because nowhere can ever be safe anymore. If I had to pick a definitive breaking point even past the one that I defined earlier, it would be the loading bay. It lulls you into a false sense of security. You know, it's the boat from chapter 1, and just like before, it's used as a bait and switch. Only this time, the game just dumps half the fucking precinct on you and expects you to figure it out. Like a lot of things in this chapter. I had more than a few embarrassing resets here because of the swimming cops. Because of course enemies can swim. If there was just one thing that the developers were going to carry over from Blood, I'm sure that was what people were really excited for, swimming hit scanners. But finally, after clearing through this godforsaken rat hole and having every last ounce of my patience tested, we can reach the end. And the game decides that now would be a good time for a boss fight. The armored amalgam from Interlude is recycled here as a half mini-boss sort of ordeal. But because the developers aren't done putting razor blades in your cereal, once you knock out the first one's armor, a second second one spawns and you get to fight too. Thankfully their attack pattern wasn't meaningfully changed, so what was an easy fight in Interlude is even easier as we're fully kitted out by this point in the game. But these guys are not the final boss. No, the final boss is thankfully substantially better than what came before. The High Archon is actually a pretty kick-ass boss fight. Compared to the 3 previous bosses we've had, this one is actually kind of a challenge. He's fast, light, and can deal some pretty serious damage. Although some of his lunge attacks can be borderline hit scan with how accurate they are, it's kinda stupid. Thankfully, we're given a whole cornucopia of items at the start, including a bunch of weapon parts, so just go to town upgrading your gear. If I can make a single suggestion, put some points into the FG42, namely the upgraded ammo and the full auto conversion. This thing does wonders on the Archon's armor bar. I mean, you can just tear through it with this thing. Using that to break his armor, and then the Sten gun to deal damage once his armor is down, you can like 4-cycle him, it's crazy. All in all though, it's a pretty damn fun fight. Actually had to use most of my neurons for this one. And after a worthy showdown, the Archon falls, and we can finally take care of business. He tries to bullshit his way out of it, saying that we're almost as messed up on imbued material as he is. Granted, we have consumed our fair share of imbued remains over the course of the game. But, you know, that doesn't work, so we're just gonna finish the job.
Wait, no! If you destroy the hub, the connection will be severed. You can't do this!
With the connection severed, we can rest easy. Our work here is done. So, that's a wrap. Overall, despite a bit of a slump in the later half of the chapter, and some minor gripes with the game's map design, I enjoyed my time with Chapter 2. Unfortunately, I can't say that it'll apply to most people. Again, if you were just a casual enjoyer of Episode 1, I'd consider holding your purchase. Don't get me wrong, it's a damn good time, but it's a chapter of much higher highs and lower lows. I really enjoyed it, but it can be pretty sweaty at times. This is all coming from someone who only plays on very hard difficulty, so I can't really attest to how other difficulties are. Frankly, they're probably more enjoyable. Either way, this seems like a pretty solid bookend for the detective story. Since the release of Chapter 2, the game has had a few updates, mainly quality of life stuff. But for the foreseeable future, I can't see this game getting any kind of major story DLC. Not to say that's a bad thing. I mean, we've got 2 solid chapters and a really good survival mode to sink your teeth into, and for a total combined price of about 20-ish bucks, that's a mighty fine bargain. But for right now, that's all from me. Next time, we're diving headfirst into working the job that all conspiracy theorists dream of.